This episode of the TCF World podcast was recorded in Baghdad just before the outbreak of demonstrations in late September. Samya Kullab from the Iraq Oil Report discussed Iraq's oil infrastructure with me. And while Iraq's political crises seem to wax and wane over the years, one constant is Iraq's oil wealth and burgeoning oil industry, which belie the country's importance, drive its corruption, and are one of the most important factors in attracting the attention of its neighbors. Welcome to the TCF World podcast. I'm Thanasi Kambanis. I'm in Baghdad with Samya Kullab, the senior correspondent for the Iraq Oil Report.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about Iraqi oil today, and this conversation is going to be in three parts. In the beginning, first section, we're going to have an overview of the Iraqi energy sector. In the second section, we're going to talk about, what did we decide we're going to talk about?
I think you said we're going to talk about the American companies' investment in the oil sector.
American role in the Iraqi energy sector, yeah. And in the third section, we're going to talk about the intersection
between policy and...
Great.
Yeah.
So we're set.
Yeah.
We've got a roadmap. Samya, I'm really glad we could do this. And we're here on a nice barricaded street in Baghdad. And we just saw each other at a conference that was entitled Baghdad is Recovering, or no, Iraq is Recovering.
That's right.
So let's hear about Iraqi oil. I mean, this is, people always talk, especially in the U.S., about the war in Iraq is about the oil. Iraq is sort of synonymous with oil, and yet they don't really seem to have any sense of what
that entails.
Yeah. So give us a little, high altitude tour.
So everyone knows that the oil sector is extremely important in Iraq. It's the primary source of state revenue. We're talking 85 to 90%. And diversifying the economy has been extremely difficult because the reliance on oil is so strong. And if prices are high, the impetus within the government to diversify, is suddenly not as strong. So it remains and will remain a very important part of the economy. The lion's share of production in Iraq comes from the south, particularly in Basra, Dikar, and Misan. But really, when we're talking about where is the majority of Iraq's oil produced? It's in Basra, the province in the south. There's a little bit that's produced in the north in Kirkuk, but that is producing way below capacity because of a myriad of reasons.
And give us a sense of scale. I mean, how big is this? Is the oil production in this country, and how does that compare to the other leading world oil producers?
According to Iraq Oil Report's analysis, in August, Iraq reached record levels of production with 5 million barrels a day. That includes Kurdistan as well, which operates independently, and that's a different issue, source of great tension, which I can get into later. Recently, Iraq has been producing lower than its capability because of the OPEC benchmark. But Iraq is definitely able to produce 5 million barrels a day at this point and more. There are several factors that kind of inhibit Iraq from reaching this capacity, including, export bottlenecks in the south.
So where does that put it among world producers?
It's the second largest OPEC producing country. And within the world, I'm not actually sure on it's in the top 10, but not
the non-OPEC major producers being U.S., Russia.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's the second largest OPEC producer after Saudi Arabia. What is the theoretical maximum capacity for Iraqi daily oil production? I remember during the invasion of Iraq when America was planning to pay for the occupation with oil revenues, people were throwing around like 10 million barrels per day. And back then it was like 2 or less or 1.
Right. No, I mean, the capacity is still, if everything were working as efficiently as possible, if all the technologies were, up to par, if the infrastructure didn't have issues, then certainly I think, in theory, But those issues are still there. Those issues will hamper Iraq's ability to reach that potential. So, the main issues that I've seen from speaking to officials and IOCs is
international
oil companies. That's correct. There's a lot of lingo.
We political junkies don't know the terminology.
There's like a whole language covering oil. International oil companies. The bottlenecks in the south in Basra is one of the major issues that's kind of hindering Iraq from reaching its full potential.
Is this a bottleneck in shipping or a bottleneck in some other part of the oil?
In the infrastructure itself. So the pipelines, for example, onshore to these offshore terminals are old, and if there's a lot of pressure, they start leaking. There's also infrastructure that remains vulnerable to bad weather. So if there's bad weather, then the tugboats can't get to the terminals or whatever. So that creates stoppages. And then there's the other issue of water supply for injection to create pressure, especially in older fields, so they can continue, meeting their production targets, which increase. So for some of the major oil fields in the south right now, the issue is where will that water come from? And there's several potential projects. There's actually one particular project, but that's sort of been the subject of negotiations for a long time. And we see this in the sector with big mega infrastructure projects that cost billions and billions of dollars. They're often stuck in the negotiating table. They're often stuck at the state and these international oil companies trying to agree on certain commercial terms. So that is another factor as to why we haven't really seen a lot of movement in rehabilitating or replacing this aging infrastructure. And that's a fairly big problem actually in Iraq's oil sector.
And what about new exploration or new fields?
So there was a fifth bidding round, and that's basically how the oil ministry auctions off fields to different companies. There was one just before the election last year, and this highlights some of the bureaucratic issues.
We'll just rewind because this is like oil for dummies. Are there a lot of known but unexploited oil fields?
There are exploration blocks, absolutely, yeah, that aren't are assigned to particular oil companies at this point.
So
that the ministry is
interested.
There's
oil under the ground, and they just have to.
Well, it depends.
Figure out how to.
It depends. I don't know the level of studies that have been done in particular blocks, but there's a suspicion that there might be. The first step for the company would be like seismic to actually look and see what are the recoverables. The latest attempt by the ministry to auction off these blocks happened last year. However, one of the main issues that I've come across covering oil in Iraq is the bureaucracy, the delays in getting these contracts. Even if a certain block or a field has been, a company has won it in a bid, actually signing those contracts, getting it through the different parties, getting the final stamp of approval. There's a lot of different hurdles that come in the way. So that's sort of slowed down the process of exploring new potentials.
And what's the lay of the land? I mean, in Saudi Arabia, we have this one state-controlled, giant company, Saudi Aramco, that runs everything. And even though it has lots of foreign expertise and money in it, it's one state company. Is Iraq more Wild West? Is there a state oil company and major foreign companies that have responsibilities for major aspects of production here?
There are several state oil companies, but they're divided by region. So there's in the south, there's in the middle, there's in the north.
Okay.
But the policy is all directed by the oil ministry. So it's fairly centralized. But the IOC, the international oil companies, deal...
Okay, now that you introduced us to the acronym, we can go with IOCs. I won't be thinking International Olympic Committee, which is was my first...
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so they... it's important for them to have a good relationship with the director general of these state oil companies. So these state oil companies. So it's important for international oil companies in Basra to have a good relationship with the director general, because often they're taking their grievances to him. If not him, then the oil minister. And then there's sort of different levels to get certain contracts signed, certain things pushed through.
It sounds like opportunities for corruption rather than efficient management to have these multiple oil companies and a minister on top instead of a sort of single structure.
Allegations of corruptions are rampant in Iraq, and not just in the oil sector and basically any ministry. But yes, of course you hear that. You of course you hear MPs on television, accusing DGs of. We saw that a lot actually with this particular administration, and that's caused a lot of delays. I think the current oil minister is very much methodical and wants to review everything, especially everything his predecessor had, kind of pushed through to the end stage. He sort of started again from scratch, I think, to avoid these allegations of corruption.
Yeah, a year ago, I think you reported that a lot of these major, including the natural gas flare capture contract, but I'm not sure if that's right, but a lot of major contracts were put on ice when the new government came in.
Yeah, and I think that was very much, an initiative of the oil minister who, from what I've seen, and some, it's not, obviously if you're an oil company and you're waiting for something to get signed so you can, get to work, it's not the best scenario for them. But I think whenever there's a new administration, they want to make sure that there are no surprises, that they understand exactly what they're agreeing to, and I think that's sort of the mentality of the current minister. And if there are elements that disagree, for example, the Board of Supreme Audit might have disagreements with the fifth bidding round contracts. That's caused the minister to kind of look it over to
further delays, in other words.
Further delays, but also I think to make sure everyone's on the same page.
As we wrap up our 30,000 foot tour, is it right that the country lacks its own refining capacity and also that it wastes all the natural gas that comes out of the ground along with the oil by burning
the
it off?
associated gas. It doesn't waste all of it, but it wastes the vast majority of it, I think. There have been measures taken to capture it. I think a good example of that actually working is in Gazprom and the Budra field, which is in Wasit. They're capturing the associated gas, but the vast majority is in the south, and that is still being flared. And that's
so Wasit in the middle Iraq oil company.
Yeah, the Midland oil company.
So a Russian company is capturing a small amount of natural gas, but the vast majority of it is in the south.
And the Chinese are also working with them. But the vast majority, because the vast majority of oil fields are in the south, it makes sense why the vast majority of associated gas is being flared in the south as well. So there's been incremental progress on that front. What I have seen is a lot of progress in the last year and a half, I'd say. Gas has historically been a secondary priority for the oil sector here. But we've seen, especially after the events in Basra, the protests last year, and then in the context of rising U.S.-Iran tensions and pressure on Iraq to become more gas independent, there's been a real push for Iraq to develop its own, means of acquiring gas, and it makes sense because it's millions of dollars, lost into the air. It's terrible for the environment. Plus, it's valuable feedstock that can power plants and provide electricity that's badly needed. So it makes sense why they should. It's an important project for Iraq, and but it's only been recently, really, that I've seen it being taken very seriously.
Well, the electricity issue is, I think, related to all this. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
American officials might want to pivot to Asia and spend less time thinking about the Middle East, but Middle East policy problems continue to occupy the majority of their time. Syria in particular has confounded policymakers. The Century Foundation's research can resolve some of the confusion. To learn what's happened in Syria and what can be done now, visit the Syria section on the Century Foundation's website, tcf.org.
You're listening to the TCF World podcast. This is the Nasi Kambanis. I'm here in Baghdad with Samya Kullab talking about Iraqi oil. Samya, before the break, we were talking about the natural gas and the sort of what does and doesn't exist in Iraq's oil infrastructure. Now I want to talk about one of Americans' favorite subjects, which is America. What is the American role in the Iraqi oil sector and energy sector?
Yeah, the Americans play a fairly important role, actually. So ExxonMobil is an operator of one of the biggest oil fields in Iraq, West Gurna 1, producing between 420 and 450,000 barrels a day.
It's like 10.
So last month, for example, according to Iraq Oil Report's analysis, West Gurna 1 produced 450,000 barrels.
That's 10% of Iraq's
5
capacity.
million.
Okay.
So it's a sizable chunk. And in terms of gas, Iraq recently signed a memorandum of understanding with an American consortium led by Honeywell, which, if realized, would be extremely important for making Iraq more gas independent. Basically, processing 300 million standard cubic feet a day. So it would be roughly it would roughly cut Iraq's current level of flaring by 20%. So that would be an incredibly important project if it goes forward. In Iraq, an MOU doesn't necessarily mean that a contract will be signed. There's several steps along the way, especially financing. So
this would be American companies capturing natural gas that would be used for energy production. Would they also build a power plant, or that's a different thing? Where would that natural gas go?
Well, it would process the natural gas. I assume, it would go towards meeting these electricity.
Do they have to build new power plants that will be fueled by natural gas, or can they retrofit the existing ones to use natural gas?
They need more gas to power plants. I think that it's the question of where is the gas coming from. I don't think it's not necessarily a question of, where to feed that gas.
So the U.S. has one big existing contract, the ExxonMobil contract. It has this thing in the works that is something that I understand has been realized since the Trump administration took office. Right? That wasn't being discussed before. That's something that came into being relatively recently.
And another one, which is extremely important if it happens, though it's been on the negotiating table for like 8 years, is something called the Southern Iraq Integrated Project, the CIIP. And that is with ExxonMobil and also PetroChina. So, that's a massive, $50 billion project.
God, the numbers in this business are huge.
I know, it's kind of insane. But it's difficult to say exactly what the parameters of this project will be because it's evolved over the years. But if it were, but it includes 3 major elements that are extremely important to developing Iraq's oil sector. So, and they're elements I mentioned before. They would be improving infrastructure to raise export capacity. It would be creating facilities to treat to process associated gas, and then it would also be finding sources of supplying oil fields with water for reinjection.
So it's all improving extraction and ability to bring oil to market, and not creating refining capacity.
No, I don't believe refining capacity is part of that deal, unless it is, and it's a part of it's a new addition that I'm not aware of. But no, as far as I know.
So people ask me this question all the time, and I don't have an answer. But now I can ask you, and maybe you do. People say, America invaded Iraq. Everyone said it was about the oil, and then they say, why didn't America end up with a bigger role in the oil industry? I mean, 10% is significant, but it seems like other countries like China and Russia and the UK are equally involved. So how come post invasion and occupation, we didn't see somehow a larger American role in the Iraqi oil market?
I mean, I assume that's something American diplomats ask Iraqi officials these days. I'm not actually sure how to answer that question, to be honest.
I mean, was it just nobody asked, or was it the Americans didn't want to seem unseemly?
No, I mean, these oil fields aren't just handed to countries. They're not just handed to companies. There's a competitive bidding process for them. They're auctioned off. So I assume that the companies that got these oil fields, had a better, their offer was closer to what the ministry had in mind.
Other oil companies just outbid the American companies,
basically.
I mean, I always wondered whether part of it was that the U.S. oil companies weren't as comfortable operating in the uncertainty. I mean, by the way, created by the United States, but the uncertainty of that first period of 2003 to say, well, really 2 years ago, if that was part of the factor, or if they were bidding on those jobs anyway and just got outbid.
All I can say is the process by which these oil fields were, given to companies was based on a bidding process. So either you have winners and you have losers, and it's not necessarily something that's negotiated.
It's an interesting outcome. I mean, because the U.S. really didn't have trouble, acting in unseemly ways in other respects in Iraq.
But it does. I mean, certainly now in this particular climate, there is a perception among Iraqi officials that Iraq Oil Report has spoken to, that when they meet with American diplomats discussing, sanction waivers and things like that, there is a perception that one of the conditions to satisfy another sanction waiver or more down the line is to sign more contracts with American companies.
And are they apparently
But this is a
willing
perception that they have. It's not necessarily a reflection of, what's going on.
As I understand it, it is U.S. policy. I mean, this is something I hear from the other side, from U.S. officials, that they are actively interested in, in a way that I find troubling. But anyway, this is the line of American policy is to overtly, and that's why we had these delegations of, the U.S. energy minister and others coming here at a time of heightened tension to say, if you're willing to do business with us, then we will be willing to look more warmly on the other important aspects of our security and economic relationship. And my impression is that Iraq has been willing to discuss this, and instead of, I mean, whatever, I guess they don't have a whole lot of choice, but I mean, they could be less cooperative, and they've said, okay, let's see whether we can cut this Honeywell contract and make you feel like you're getting the profits you want in Iraq to make Iraq worth you supporting.
Yeah, but at the same time, not that I'm supporting anyone or anything. I mean, my opinions of policies completely aside, Iraqi officials also tell me it's good for American companies to be working in Iraq. It's good to sign contracts with Exxon. It's good to sign contracts with GE, because in a way they're like flag bearers. If they come into this economy, other companies will follow. They don't necessarily have to be American.
So it's not about pleasing America. It's about getting the Western investment or foreign investment to...
It works in Iraq's favor as well, is what I'm saying. It's not just, they're being forced to do this. I think that they also see the benefit for themselves.
All right, we'll be right back.
What exactly would a progressive foreign policy look like in the Middle East? What can governments do differently and better? Critiques are easy. Providing realistic policy proposals is harder. I'm Michael Wahid Hanna, and with my colleagues and collaborators here at the Century Foundation, we're trying to answer the hard policy questions with specific, concrete proposals. You can see our ideas and join the conversation on our website, tcf.org.
I'm Thanasi Kambanis. I'm here in Baghdad with Samya Kullab from the Iraq Oil Report. We're now, you just brought us into our third segment with what you said at the end of our last section about policy and about sort of paving the way for global markets. What So you said that Iraq sees it in its interest to get these IOCs. So I picked that up.
That was really well done.
into this market. So aside from the obvious economic goal of maximizing the revenue you can get from oil, what's Iraq's policy goal through its, what is it trying to accomplish policy-wise through its energy sector? I mean, does it use its energy sector and contracts as a way of trying to create a balanced set of foreign powers that are interested in the country? Does it use oil contracts as an entry point to negotiate other commercial investment or other policy aims it has? And I have in mind like this recent visit to China where the prime minister went, I guess, with oil people and dozens of other officials to sort of use oil as I'm wondering, was oil the leading edge to get a bunch of stuff that is?
I think so, insofar as deepening economic cooperation in any sector, kind of sets a nice foundation for cooperation in on other levels, be it political or social or developmental or whatever. So with China, I mean, Iraqi officials tell me that they like the way the Chinese work. They get things done on time. They are able to finance themselves most of the time. And they like that kind of efficiency. So they've already seen, they're quite happy with their work in oil. And so they're now, cooperating with them through this agreement. The Chinese are supposed to build schools, in terms of...
Have they done it?
They haven't done it, but the financing for it is secure. It's actually in the 2019 budget. So that's an example of where cooperation in one level has led to cooperation in other sort of sectors, and I think it's the same in for other countries as well. Certainly, there's a good relationship with the U.S. because of its participation in the oil sector.
We haven't talked about the immediate neighboring countries, and maybe we can talk about Turkey too. But I was wondering, Iran and the Arab Peninsula countries, which are in some sense, share some of these fields, in some sense are direct competitors. The pathway to market, I presume, is all through the same.
Mean the Gulf, the Basra Gulf or the Persian Gulf.
The Persian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula. What are the legal?
Persian Gulf, Basra Gulf.
How does Iraq get along with and work with those with its immediate neighbors to the south?
So Iraq will say that they talk to everybody. Often when I ask them, what's the best way to understand where Iraq falls in light of these increasing tensions, with the U.S. and Iran, they'll say, well, we talk to everyone, so we can actually play a really great mediating role. Iraq has an interest in maintaining these export channels. They don't want any kind of disruption to them. And so I think I see them playing a very cooperative role. And I think it's actually in everyone's interest to make sure that these channels remain open.
Is it a technical problem that their sort of patch of geography on the Gulf is so tiny compared to everyone else's?
Oh, absolutely. And it's so tiny, and also it's where all the lion's share of exports have to travel through in order to reach market. So it's an extremely important little piece of geography for Iraq. Absolutely.
So one complete choke point where everything goes through, not just oil, by the way, right? I mean, all of the goods from
Qasr, yeah.
So and is there any? I mean, is Iraq at the mercy of its neighbors in any way? I mean, or is it, once they can get the oil down to their port, are they sort of in the clear for getting it?
Well, at the mercy, I wouldn't use those words, but if there were tensions in that area such that Iraq could no longer use it as an export route, Iraq has no other option. And we're talking about,
or
I mean,
Iran could easily, technically speaking,
to give you some perspective, Iraq has been prioritizing alternative export routes. I mean, in the ministry, they know that this is an issue. They need more flexibility, especially because this is where all of state revenue comes from. I mean, it would be absolutely disastrous if something were to happen. But the projects that I've heard the oil minister, bring up many times, there's no real development on the ground. As far as I know, they exist as like tender documents. So there's the Jordan pipeline that would go from Basra, Haditha to Aqaba. And then there's also the basically rebuilding the Iraq-Turkey pipeline that was destroyed by ISIS.
Where did that go from?
Kirkuk to Ceyhan. So the Kurds built an addition to that. So now it goes from like Kurdish-controlled territory to Ceyhan. There's a little bit because of a political agreement that is exported from the federally state-owned North Oil Company through that pipeline, but not enough to sustain Iraq's needs. So these are the two main projects that have been under discussion, but there has been no real movement. No companies have been contracted to do it. For example, if that were to happen, then that's a really important step, but it hasn't. So right now, Iraq depends on the South.
Is the Iraqi oil sector a sort of leader in terms of professionalism and capacity? I mean, so for example, in Saudi Arabia, where my impression certainly is that most sectors can't do anything or have no capacity. The oil sector has capacity, and so like when the government wants to build a university, they bring in the oil company to do it, even though the oil company is an oil company because it's the only state entity that can do things. I don't have that same impression about Iraq, but that's from just casual observation.
There are smart people in the oil ministry. There are very smart technocrats who know what they're doing in the oil ministry. I mean, I talk to them. They know what they're talking about for sure. And I think the transfer of knowledge that they've experienced over the years from IOCs being here has also improved that. I do see capability and growing professionalism. And I've seen more of that actually. This initiative for the state to take, over operating fields, for example, over doing certain contracts when previously they were held by international oil companies for, and terminated for various reasons. The state has sort of stepped in and said, actually, we can do this. So I've seen more of that recently, and perhaps that's a sign of an increasing professionalism, or a sign of, Iraq wanting to be a little bit more independent in terms of how it manages its sector, how it operates, different projects.
There's lots more we could discuss, but we'll just leave it there. Samya, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Thank you for having me.
PCF World has been brought to you by the Century Foundation, a progressive public policy think tank that seeks to foster opportunity, reduce inequality, and promote security at home and abroad. For more information about our work, please visit tcf.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook.